Imagine standing on a quiet patch of land in Virginia. The sun filters softly through trees, casting long shadows across the ruins of a place where a nation began. It's calm now, but beneath your feet, there's a secret, buried with honor, but born in scandal. This is Jamestown. Not the Hollywood version, not the simplified tale of pilgrims and Pocahontas. No, this is the real Jamestown, the one where mud, blood, disease, and desperation greeted every step off the boat. The one where power wasn't just fought for, it was inherited, sometimes falsely. In 1607, 3 small ships creaked their way across the Atlantic: the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. On board were 104 men and boys, many dreaming of gold, others running from ghosts back home. They didn't know it yet, but they were stepping into a living hell. The land they landed on was no paradise: swampy, humid, infested with mosquitoes. Clean water, almost non-existent. Food, scarce. Welcome to the New World. Within weeks, the colonists began dying: dysentery, typhoid, and what they called bloody flux. When they weren't sick, they were starving. When they weren't starving, they were being attacked by native warriors defending their lands. And when they weren't being attacked, they were turning on each other. But somehow they clung on. By 1610, the settlement was hanging by a thread. Just 60 survivors remained. That's when a nobleman arrived, Thomas West, Lord de la Warr, bringing soldiers, supplies, and one of the greatest what-ifs of early American history. And with him came his blood. His relatives, like Captain William West and Sir Ferdinando Wenman, were not just here to explore. They were part of an aristocratic dynasty trying to take root in alien soil. These weren't just men, they were legacies. Their names mattered. Their honor had to be preserved even in death. That's why years later, archaeologists found their bones in the most sacred part of Jamestown, under the church. You see, then you didn't just bury anyone in a church. That ground was for saints, heroes, or people with the right last name. And as they exhumed these remains in 2013 and 2014, it became clear they weren't just digging up history. They were about to challenge it. One skeleton wore the fragile remnants of a spangled sash, woven with silver threads, a military symbol of status. Another lay in a finely crafted coffin, the kind only a knight might warrant. These weren't anonymous settlers. These were men with a past, and it turns out, a scandal that never made it into the history books. Using DNA, the kind passed from mother to child like a hidden signature, scientists discovered something that the tombstones never told. The 2 men, Captain West and Sir Ferdinando Wenman, shared more than loyalty to the same noble house. They shared blood, the maternal kind, the kind that reveals what the surname conceals. Wait, how? Captain West was supposed to be a nephew to the governor. Sir Wenman was his cousin. But cousins don't usually share that kind of maternal DNA unless there's another connection. A closer, messier one, and that's when researchers found it. A forgotten court document, a reference to a woman named Elizabeth West. A woman who never married. A woman who gave birth to a child quietly, discreetly, without a husband. Her child, William West, the man buried with a soldier's honor, was born in scandal. Now let's imagine what it must have been like over 400 years ago when a young man named William West stepped off that boat in 1610. He wasn't just another settler, scraping together hope from hardship. He was, at least, on paper, a gentleman, a man of status, a kinsman of the governor himself, Thomas West, a man whose name opened doors. And in a place like Jamestown, where the line between life and death could be a bowl of porridge or a warm blanket, status mattered more than most today could ever understand. But here's the cruel twist of it all. While his sash shimmered and his title traveled ahead of him, William West's blood told a different story, literally. Centuries later, a group of researchers stood quietly over the bones that lay beneath Jamestown's long-lost church. They weren't treasure hunters or thrill-seekers. They were archaeologists, geneticists, historians, and their tools weren't shovels and lanterns. They had microscopes, lab samples, and DNA sequencers. In the two most elaborate coffins under the church, their attention centered on two men, one believed to be Sir Ferdinando Wenman and the other Captain William West, to the living world of the 1600s. These two men were distant cousins, related, yes, but in the formal, cold, genealogical way that all noble families were. They were important, but no one ever guessed they were closer. Then came the mitochondrial DNA results. Now, for those who might not know, mitochondrial DNA isn't just any DNA. It doesn't come from your father. It's passed down from your mother, untouched by the male line. It's like a signature from your maternal lineage, repeated like a quiet hymn through generations. If two people share the same rare mitochondrial DNA pattern, it means they had the same mother or grandmother or great-grandmother. Not just kin, but direct family. And Wenman and West, they shared that signature. This wasn't an administrative cousinship. This was maternal blood. This was something deeper and much harder to explain. Historians scratched their heads. The family tree, as it stood in dusty archives and polished noble lineages, didn't make room for this. These men weren't supposed to be maternally linked so closely. And so a mystery was born, not in the dirt but in the DNA. Why would a man like William West, with the surname of the governor's family, carry mitochondrial DNA linking him to the same woman as Sir Ferdinando Wenman? The answer, as it turns out, wasn't in Jamestown, it was back in England, in court papers, letters, and family testimonies that had been gathering dust for centuries. Among those documents, researchers found the name Elizabeth West. She was a noblewoman. She was also unmarried, and she had a son, a child born not to a husband but to a secret. That child was William West. His father, unrecorded. His mother, hidden in plain sight. This is where history and scandal collide. You see, in the 17th century, legitimacy wasn't just a matter of shame, it was a matter of survival. An illegitimate child, especially to a noblewoman, was considered a blot on the family honor, a stain that could ruin marriages, inheritance, and political alliances. So what did noble families do? They rewrote the story. They absorbed the child into the family, reassigned paternity, and carried on as if nothing had happened. And that's exactly what happened to William West. Publicly, he was presented as a nephew to the governor, a respectable young officer with bloodlines that fit neatly into the aristocracy. But privately, he was the son of a woman who had no husband and every reason to stay silent. What's remarkable is how well the family protected him. He was given opportunity, rank, and ultimately a hero's burial. When he died in battle, not long after arriving in Virginia, he was laid to rest in the most sacred part of the church, among leaders and clergy. No one whispered the truth until science made the bones speak, and they spoke with precision. That DNA pattern between Wenman and West wasn't vague. It was a perfect match, a genetic smoking gun. With that single finding, centuries of carefully constructed family narratives unraveled in a matter of weeks in the lab. But the beauty of this moment isn't just in the scandal, it's in the clarity. For the first time, ancient DNA had peeled away the social camouflage of the colonial elite, not to humiliate, but to illuminate. These were people, not mythic founders, but flawed, frightened, sometimes scandal-ridden men and women doing their best to survive and maintain appearances in a brutal new world. It also reminds us how much we still don't know. Because if one noble family in Jamestown hid a secret this well, how many others did the same? How many stories lie buried beneath our oldest churches and quiet graveyards, waiting for a strand of DNA, a curious eye, and the courage to ask uncomfortable questions? This wasn't just a scientific milestone. It was a human one. By now, the quiet floor of Jamestown's old church had revealed a secret no one expected. An illegitimate son honored as a hero. But the grave next to William West's wasn't any less fascinating. It belonged to another man of stature. Knight, a cousin, a man with his own burdens and his own fate sealed far too early, Sir Ferdinando Wenman. Wenman's bones told a quieter story, one not marked by battle, but by illness. He died only months after arriving in Jamestown in the Prime of his life, around 34 years old. No dramatic showdown, no warrior's death, just the slow, miserable decline that many in the New World faced from disease, starvation, and fatigue. But here's the thing. Both Wenman and West were buried with reverence. Not in shallow mass graves, but inside the church, in its holiest space. That decision wasn't made lightly. It meant something. In a world where social class meant everything, burial location was an announcement of status. And these men, they were honored like royalty. Still, they weren't alone. There were two more bodies buried nearby. One belonged to a man of the cloth. The other, a man of contradiction and conflict. Their inclusion in this holy space added complexity to the story, layers that modern science alone couldn't interpret. This is where archaeology and emotion must meet. Let's start with Reverend Robert Hunt. He was the colony's first Anglican minister, a deeply respected man who arrived with the First Fleet in 1607 and became a spiritual anchor during the chaos of Jamestown's earliest days. He died in 1608, likely from illness, but his impact was undeniable. In a time when hope was dying, faster than the settlers themselves, Hunt gave them something they could still believe in. When his body was discovered centuries later, archaeologists recognized his remains almost immediately, buried respectfully, arms crossed, in a simple coffin. No sash, no military badge, just quiet dignity. It was Hunt who held together the fractured souls of the colony, even as their bodies failed them, and for that, he earned his place in the chancel. Then there was the final burial. And oh, was he complicated. Captain Gabriel Archer. Archer was no stranger to conflict. In fact, he was one of the earliest rivals of John Smith, yes, that John Smith, the same one we associate with Pocahontas, survival and hard discipline. Archer thought Smith was arrogant, reckless, even dangerous, and he wasn't afraid to say so. He was educated, calculating, and ambitious, and for a while he held real power in the colony. But power is fragile when your enemies outnumber your allies. Archer's influence faded. His criticisms fell out of favor. He died during the infamous starving time in the winter of 1609-1610, along with most of the colony. But his burial, that raised eyebrows. Why? Because when archaeologists found his body, they found something deeply unusual for a Protestant colony. He was buried facing east. A traditional Christian burial, yes, but near his body was an object, a silver reliquary. That's a Catholic symbol. Now this was shocking. Jamestown was a firmly Anglican colony. England, fresh from its break with Rome, was still fighting bitterly against Catholic influence. Priests were hunted. Catholic symbols were destroyed. Loyalty to the crown meant loyalty to the Anglican Church. And yet, here was Gabriel Archer, an Anglican leader buried with a Catholic artifact. What did it mean? Was Archer secretly Catholic? Was he part of an underground religious group? Did he keep his faith hidden while navigating the dangerous waters of colonial politics? Or was someone else trying to make a quiet statement, slipping the reliquary into his grave as an act of posthumous resistance? We'll never know for sure. But one thing is clear, the graves of Jamestown don't lie flat. They rise with questions. Each burial tells a layered story. Not just of individuals, but of a colony torn between survival and identity, between faith and fear, between tradition and the harshness of a land that obeyed no law but nature. And yet, perhaps what's most remarkable about these graves is how they have reconnected us to the people of Jamestown. Not as heroes or caricatures, but as human beings, a secret son, honored but hidden, a cousin knight, taken by disease, a minister, steady in faith, a rival, buried with a symbol that whispered rebellion. Their stories linger because they mirror our own, families protecting secrets, conflicts buried but never resolved, beliefs lived quietly, defiantly, people clinging to purpose in a world collapsing around them. It's easy to forget sometimes that history isn't made by perfect people. It's made by people like us, people who fail, people who believe, people who fight, people who love and lose and carry on anyway. Let's pause for a moment, not in the past, but in the present. Because everything we've uncovered so far, from noble scandal to silent rebellion, would have stayed buried without the most unlikely hero of the story, ancient DNA. Now, when most people hear DNA, they think of crime shows, ancestry websites, or awkward family surprises. But ancient DNA, that's something else entirely. We're talking about biological traces that have survived centuries, trapped in the porous structures of bone, teeth, or even soil. It's fragile, contaminated easily, and difficult to read. Yet somehow these ghostly blueprints still whisper secrets from the grave. You just have to know how to listen. That's what the team at the Jamestown Rediscovery Project did. And they weren't alone. They partnered with forensic anthropologists, geneticists, and even historians, with an eye for scandal. Let's go behind the scenes. It begins with a lab, a sterile room, humming with quiet tension. Under bright lights, a gloved hand lifts a femur. It looks dry, lifeless, but within that bone a hidden code, one that hasn't been read since Shakespeare was still writing sonnets. To retrieve it, scientists begin a delicate process. First, the outer layer of the bone is shaved off. This reduces contamination, because remember, even a single human hair, a sneeze, or the breath of a researcher can corrupt the entire sample. Then, from the dense inner matrix, they drill into the bone and extract powder. This powder is treated with special chemicals that release the genetic material, if any remains, and then comes the sequencing. Now, in ancient samples, DNA doesn't come out in neat, complete strands. It's fragmented, torn, like someone shredded a 1,000-year-old book and tossed it in the wind. The sequencing machine tries to read these fragments and align them like a puzzle with half the pieces missing and no box to reference. Once reconstructed, researchers compare the DNA to modern databases. They're not looking for names, they're looking for patterns, ancestral lineages, regional markers, maternal signatures like mitochondrial DNA, and occasionally rare mutations that act like a fingerprint passed down through generations. That's how the team cracked the Jamestown case. They didn't stumble on a nameplate. They uncovered a pattern, a very specific mitochondrial DNA sequence shared by both Sir Ferdinando Wenman and Captain William West. That sequence became the turning point. When historians saw it, they knew something didn't fit. The family tree, on paper, showed these men as distant cousins, connected through the governor's paternal line. But this DNA showed something far more intimate, a shared female ancestor. You could almost hear the silence in that room, because once DNA tells you something, you can't unhear it. The team retraced the lineage, dug through letters, wills, estate, records. And there she was, Elizabeth West, the woman history had nearly erased, unmarried, noble, and mother to a child whose birth was never meant to be public. Without DNA, her story would have remained a whisper. But with it, she became a pivot point in Jamestown's early narrative, not just as a mother, but as a symbol of the secrets families were willing to bury and the lengths they would go to protect appearances. And that's what makes this discovery so powerful. We often think of science as cold, clinical, emotionless, but this was personal. Science didn't just name the dead, it restored their truth. It reassembled broken narratives with compassion. It challenged history to look again, not with judgment, but with clarity. And it made us ask better questions. How many more Elizabeth Wests are out there? How many sons raised under one name but born under another? How many secrets lie just beneath the topsoil, waiting for a microscope, a patient heart, and a willingness to rethink the past? That's the gift of ancient DNA. It's not just a tool, it's a time machine. One that doesn't just take us back, but lets us listen to the forgotten, the misrepresented, the misunderstood. And Jamestown isn't unique. All across the world, archaeologists and geneticists are teaming up to reveal new truths from old bones. In France, DNA revealed the mixed ancestry of medieval plague victims. In Egypt, researchers traced the Tutankhamun family line and uncovered deep genetic illness. In England, DNA confirmed the twisted spine of King Richard III, whose bones were found under a parking lot. And now in Virginia, a quiet church floor. told the story of love, shame, ambition, and legacy, all in the spiral of a gene. The implications are staggering, because the more we study ancient DNA, the more we realize our history books were written with only half the ink. The rest? It's in our bones. The floorboards of an old church, a sash woven with silver thread, a name whispered through DNA. We began this journey walking through the ruins of Jamestown, a place most of us learned about in school as the first successful English colony in America. But we've discovered something far richer and far more human. We didn't just find settlers, we found secrets, we found pain, power, and preservation of appearances. We found 4 men, buried with honor, but whose stories were more complicated than anyone had guessed. And somehow we found ourselves, because if there's one truth Jamestown forces us to confront, it's this: history is not written in stone. It's written in flesh, in blood, in silence, and sometimes in shame. Take Captain William West, for example. To the world, he was a gentleman, a soldier, a member of a noble family with all the right connections. He was buried in the holiest part of the church, his sash glittering with status, but his DNA told us something his surname never did, that he was born from scandal, that his mother, Elizabeth West, never married, that he was illegitimate. In his time, this would have been enough to ruin a reputation. But his family didn't banish him. They protected him. They gave him a name, a rank, a chance. They buried him as one of their own. That tells us something. It tells us that even then, in a world ruled by hierarchy and tradition, human bonds, sometimes, meant more than the rules meant to control them. And then there was Sir Ferdinando Wenman, his cousin not just in name but in blood, a man who died quietly in the colony's earliest days. History almost forgot him. But now, 400 years later, science has brought his story back into the light. There was Reverend Hunt, the spiritual backbone of a failing colony. He didn't die a hero's death in battle, but his legacy survived because he gave people something to hold on to in the darkest hour. And finally, Gabriel Archer, a man of contradiction. Buried with a Catholic artifact in a Protestant colony, a leader, a critic, and maybe a quiet rebel. Together they paint a picture not of perfection, but of persistence. This wasn't a colony of flawless founders. It was a desperate experiment, held together by faith, ambition, and a refusal to give up, even when starvation, violence, and political chaos made survival seem impossible. And now, we return to the bones. Because in the end, that's what they are, bones, but they are also records. Far more honest than any paper or painting. Bones don't lie. They don't edit themselves. They don't omit scandal to protect a legacy. They tell the truth, brutally, beautifully, unforgettably. That's what makes this discovery so important, not just to historians, but to all of us. It shows us that science can correct what pride erased, that even the dead can find their voice, if we're willing to listen. And that sometimes the past isn't behind us, it's beneath us. But let's take this one step further. Let's talk about us. About now. Because what other secrets are we still protecting? What other truths are we too afraid to dig up? Maybe they're not buried in the ground. Maybe they're buried in our families, our memories, or our collective history, and maybe, just maybe, the lesson of Jamestown is that we owe it to ourselves and to the next generation to start digging. Not just for facts, but for understanding. Because when we uncover the past with honesty, we build a future with depth. This isn't just a story about DNA, it's a story about empathy. It's about looking at those who came before us, not as names, in a textbook, but as people, real people, with fears, regrets, secrets, and love. And it's a reminder that no one is simple, not in life, not in death. Not even after 400 years. So the next time you walk through an old town or pass a crumbling church or read a name on a weathered headstone, remember, there's more beneath your feet than dust. There are stories, there are lives, and there are truths still waiting to be told. Thanks to science, to curiosity, and to the relentless pursuit of truth, Jamestown has spoken. The question now is, are we ready to listen elsewhere?